Welcome to the Pride Campaign kickoff and our last of our 3 series of our office hours. We really appreciate you joining us, and we're really excited about this initiative and looking forward to having Emerson introduce themselves and tell you all about this campaign. But before we start with that, I just want to go over a few of our virtual meeting etiquette rules. I see a lot of familiar faces, but maybe some new faces in the room. So just make sure you sign in using the link that we chatted. We'll chat it again just as a reminder. Also to please mute yourself if you're not speaking. Also, this meeting is being recorded, so feel free to hide your video panel if you do not want to be recorded. Additionally, if you're having any issues with sound, you can chat us. And at any point, you can use the chat box or raise your hand to ask questions. In addition to that, you can chat Lauren Anderson or myself, Laura Beth, if at any point you feel like you need any additional mental health support. One thing we'd like to try out, if you could try to raise your hand. It's a feature in the chat box, so we can call on you just in case there are a lot of people that have questions. It might be an easy way to call on people to best guide the conversation. So here are the instructions. 1, we click on the icon labeled participants at the bottom center of your screen. At the bottom of the window on the right-hand side of the screen, click the button labeled raise hand. To lower your digital hand, click on the icon again. I see Jada, I see everyone testing it. Awesome. Looks like you guys have the raise hand feature down. Are you guys doing a bunch of Zoom meetings or something? Alrighty, great. Well, if you're having any trouble with that, feel free to chat myself and I can help you figure it out. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Emerson and they can introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with some more introductions.
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Emerson. I'm one of the student interns for OVEM this semester, and I'm really glad to see everybody here. I know I've seen some of you in the weekly Wellness Wednesdays, and I'm really grateful for all the awesome turnout. So I've created this presentation mainly to focus on the Pride month of June and how we can best support the LGBTQ plus community. And one way that I really like to highlight how to best support trans people and non-binary people is to start normalizing sharing pronouns when you introduce yourself. And so we have a good number of people, and hopefully we can get through everybody who wants to share their name, their pronouns, what school they're from, and if your hands could be made out of any food, what would they be made out of? It's kind of a funky question. You can take that however you like, and anybody can get us started.
I guess I'll go. My name is Michaela. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm from Madison High School. If my hands were made out of food, I feel like cheese is the first somewhat structurally sound thing that I thought of, so I'm going to go with that.
All right, nice and practical. Thanks for sharing. Anastasia?
I can go next. Oh, what?
Oh, wait, it looks like your hand's raised, so you can kick
Okay, yeah, I don't know how it works, but sure, I'll go. So my name is Anastasia. I use she, her pronouns. I go to South Lakes High School, and if my hands were food, they'd probably be avocados for no other reason than I just really love avocados, and I could just basically have endless avocado toast. That's about it.
Thanks, Anastasia.
Hi, my name is Jada, and I go by she, her. I go to Woodson High School, and if my hands were food, I would probably choose pepperoni, because at least it's a meat, so it kind of blend in.
Nice. Would they be the little circles, and would they be floppy, or would they be the tubes?
The little circles. I like those. They like to put them on pizza and stuff.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi guys, my name is Khaira. I go by she, her. I'm from Edison High School. And I hope this is considered as a food. I would choose ice cream if I ever had the chance to.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. What flavor would you choose?
Cookies and cream or
Mm.
coffee, vanilla, anything.
Awesome. Yeah, you could even do multiple, like one finger is a different flavor.
Okay, hi guys, my name is Ilke. I go by she and hers. I go to Fairfax High School, and if my hands were made out of food, I would definitely choose sushi because I can eat sushi every single day.
Very cool. Thanks.
I take mine back. I'd also like it to be sushi after she said that. I just realized that is the perfect answer. So avocados and
Nice.
Hi, I'll go next. I think I'm last. I'm Ala, and I go by the pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm also from Fairfax High School. And if my hands were food, they'd have to be either sushi, 100%, or chocolate, because then I could have an endless supply.
Nice. Thanks, Ella. So we got 3 sushis. Very cool. All right. Anybody else want to go? Share their food, their name? All right. Well, thanks everybody for going. So I'm Emerson. I use they, them pronouns. I go to George Mason University, and if my hands are made of food, I like salami. I like cheese. So I think I could like alternate which foods were on each finger, and then I could just eat them whenever I want. Cool. So thanks for getting into that. And on the next slide, I've highlighted one of the most shocking and I think most representative statistics I could find about why I'm so passionate about supporting the LGBTQ plus community in, my journey throughout raising awareness for mental health, because out of 100% of respondents who responded to this national survey in 2019, 39% were seriously considering suicide over the past 12 months. And all of the respondents were in the LGBTQ plus community. And I picked this statistic because although it's in the minority, that is a huge pool of people from that minority. So if you consider, the statistic that is 4% of the US population is in the LGBTQ plus community, 39% of those people, that is a huge number. And on the next slide, I've pulled a different statistic that focuses more on the trans community specifically. And that is that for 54% of multiracial respondents or indigenous respondents reported having already attempted suicide. And that number is 34% higher than the national average of just anybody in the US who's attempted suicide. So those two statistics put together really inspired me to tailor this presentation to talking a little bit more about what the LGBTQ plus community is like, their different terminology, how we can best support them, and different advocacy efforts we can all make to help support this community. So on the next slide, there is a graphic that some of you may have seen, some of you may have not seen, but it's called the genderbread person. And what I really like about this is that it takes up what makes a human and separates it into 4 different characteristics or qualities. And so the first one you see is the gender identity. And this is really representing what goes on in somebody's head, how they conceptualize themselves in relation to other people or society. And what I really like about this is that it gives 2 continuums. So it gives a continuum of womanness and a continuum of manness. And a person can be on both continuums. They can present as a woman one day or a man the next day. They can view themselves one way and express it a different way. And I really like how this offers multiple options. The next one is the expression. And this can be broken down into how somebody talks, or what they wear, how they style their hair, what activities they do. And this also is on a double continuum of feminine and masculinity. The next part of it is the biological sex. And so biological sex can be broken down into a couple of different categories, like what chromosome somebody has, or their hormones, or, you know, their secondary sex characteristics. But in this graph, it's a little bit more simplistic, and it rates somebody, or they can place themselves on a continuum of femaleness or maleness. And the last one is who you're sexually attracted to and romantically attracted to. And one thing to note is that somebody can be both sexually and romantically attracted to the same type of person or a different type of person. And as you look at this, you might notice that you're trying to plot yourself on this, or you're wondering what the different categories means or how this can be used in clubs. And in a couple slides, I'm going to leave a chunk of time for questions and discussions. And so if you have any questions about this or comments about it, definitely bring it up then. In the next slide, I give a little bit more information about what the acronym means. So over the years, the LGBTQ+ acronym has changed and morphed to allow people to express their identities and find their communities. But the original acronym was LGBT, and sometimes people put it in alphabetical order, or they put the G first, but what it's known more as now is LGBT or LGBTQ. And these are some simple definitions. On the next slide, we get into the plus. So you've seen probably a couple different iterations of what the plus is. And here I give typically what it is. So if you've ever seen IA+ or IA2S, these are typically what people understand them to be. And so diving into that, intersex is a term for when your body doesn't match up what is typically considered female or male. And there's a lot of different variations and different ways that people can have their body. Asexual is also on a continuum. So somebody may never experience sexual attraction or a little bit in different situations. Similar with aromantic, that has to do with more romantic attraction. Two-spirit is a really cool role that some Native American tribes and communities have to describe people who kind of walk the line between a typically female role and a male role. But the two-spirit kind of terminology is only for Indigenous people. And I put the and more because the community is still evolving, the acronym is still evolving, and there may be other communities that I haven't mentioned that some of you or some of your friends may identify with. And here we've come into the questions and discussions portion of this. So I invite anybody to share their thoughts or their comments, questions, and I can field them or we can have a discussion about them.
This isn't a question, but when I was reading the slide of the plus slide, I remembered that in school a few months ago in Spanish, we learned about muxes, which I don't know if any of you guys know about them, but they're like a small indigenous, well, not muxes specifically, but in indigenous communities in Mexico, they have muxes, which are actually like third genders entirely, and they actually don't fit any of the other things that go into LGBTQ. Or well, yeah, I guess they go under the plus, but I thought that was cool. It just reminded me of that, so I just wanted to share.
Awesome, thanks. And so did that get brought up because they have kind of their own language, or your teacher wanted to bring awareness to it?
I don't know why we learned about that, but we read like an article or two about them, and it was talking about how they still face a lot of like discrimination, and they don't really have a spot in society, but in their own specific culture, they're actually very, very respected, and they usually take the role of being like a housewife almost. They take care of the kids and they cook and they clean, whereas people who identify as like the woman, they go out and they do a lot of the artisan work, I'm pretty sure, and then the people who identify as men mostly work in like the fields and do more like manual labor and all of that. So I just thought that was really interesting.
Awesome, thanks for bringing up that, Anastasia. There's a couple
Olivia,
cool
I
points.
saw Olivia's hand up first.
Oh, nice. And coming back to Anastasia, you bring up some really awesome points that I'll bring up later in the presentation about some of this is, highlighting communities that people have built out of necessity. And then some of it is bringing awareness for, hey, how can we learn about this? How can we support this community, or kind of, you know, make room for other people who may want to build this type of community? So thanks for bringing that up. All right, so Olivia, I think you're next.
Hi, yeah. Hopefully you guys can hear me and maybe see me. I don't know a lot about the distinction between romantic and sexual attraction. Can you speak to that, or is that not something that you've really delved into? You just know that there are these differences in the community.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The idea that's popping up in my head about how best to explain it is, typically when you're younger in age, you're more likely to feel romantic attraction to somebody. So you might want to hang out with them or do nice things for them, go on dates with them, express sort of an intimacy, whether it's emotional or in other ways. And typically as people get older, maybe into like the 15, 16, 17, 18 range, they start to experiment with how they want to show physical intimacy. So that's the idea that's popping up in my head. And I also want to point out that some people can be totally aromantic, where they feel no desire to really hang out with somebody. They're just interested in, you know, sexual exploration, or the flip-flop. Maybe somebody doesn't want to do anything physical, or they just want to, you know, hang out and spend time together. So I really like your question, because I don't see that talked about in a lot of queer spaces or queer communities. And it was a pretty recent addition to the whole acronym.
Thank you.
I saw Jada's hand up too. If
Yeah, I put it down. I actually had the exact same question.
okay.
Ah, very cool.
Yeah, Emerson, I really wanted to thank you. I think like all your definitions were really well put together, and you like spoke very well about sort of highlighting things that are sort of less talked about in the community. And like as someone who's just sort of coming into the community, and I still have a lot to learn, and I'm still like learning a lot. I've been focusing a lot on like LGBTQ history. So I just want to thank you for being like really inclusive.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's been interesting to compile all this information, because a lot of it, you know, I've already been exposed to, and some of it I had to do some extra research in. And, you know, some parts of the community I'm not specifically a part of, and I still really wanted to find people who can, you know, speak for themselves in their own community. And you all will see that a little bit later in the presentation when I talk about the advocacy efforts that I've compiled. But it's great, Michaela, that you're, you know, studying up on history and you're finding your own place in the community.
Anastasia?
Okay, I don't know. I think I might have missed it if you did mention it in the presentation, but I'd always wondered, because I didn't know exactly what it meant to be queer. So could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So some people really like the word queer because it's a little bit amorphous. So for some people, it can represent their gender identity. Some others, you know, have it represent their sexuality. Some people view it as an umbrella term, like, oh, I'm part of, you know, a queer book club, or, you know, I'm just queer. That's just who I am. And some people don't like that word because it was used as a slur for so long. And so it's kind of a word that it really depends on who's using it. I personally use the word queer interchangeably with the LGBTQ plus community, because, you know, sometimes in papers and other places I don't want to repeat the word so much. But I think it's a very cool word that's sort of catch-all.
I have another question. Sorry.
Yeah, go for it. No.
So, like, I don't have any friends who are trans, or who I don't know if I really have that many friends who are in the LGBTQ plus community. So I was just wondering, like, how do you, I'm personally not part of that community, but how do you get involved to like be supportive and an ally? I think that's what you guys called it, or just like learn more about it.
That's an awesome question. Yeah, there's a couple of things that are coming to mind when you bring that up, and some of it is awareness efforts. So educating yourself, educating your friends, your family, people who you may not even know, but they're just on your social media platforms. Another part is advocacy or supporting already established groups. So maybe, attending workshops or attending protests, or maybe looking into some causes or organizations that support, specific groups. And then another part of it is kind of community building. And this is a little bit hard to do now because everything's virtual, but there still are, YouTube pages, there are social media accounts, there's Discords, there's Reddits, there's a whole host of places where people kind of congregate and find their communities. And I also don't have like a ton of friends in the queer community. Some of them I've known through like past summer camps. But I think one way to really get into it is to educate yourself on like where do queer people like hang out, what do they do, and just seeing if that's something that you also want to do. Like maybe you want to join a queer straight alliance or a gay straight alliance, or you want to like take up knitting and you find an inclusive knitting club. But I think you bring up a good point of like, okay, so queer people are a minority. How do I meet them? How do I hang out with them? How do I support them?
I actually have a question too.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, is like the goal of like a GSA or something like trying to, like with mental health, we're like trying to normalize mental health, but for like the LGBTQ plus community, are you trying to normalize that, or are you trying to make it like something separate because it's something so different and unique? Like, is there a specific like target or like goal of what you want to do?
That's a good question. I think you're bringing up kind of the differentiation of different agendas. So are kind of separatists, they just want a club where they can hang out and they don't have to worry about like intrusive people. And some people use it for a different way, like they kind of just want to hang out, they don't really want to do anything. Or maybe another group of people, they want to change how their school treats queer people. I can speak for my experience in a QSA. I was in there for 2 years in a high school, and the high school was small already. And so the QSA was only about 10 people. But we hung out in the art room, we did art together, we talked about different issues that were affecting us, and we hung out outside of school. So we took it as kind of a more hangout club. But
So
that's a really good question.
Yeah, thank you. I have one more. So it's like, is queer just another way of saying like LGBTQ plus?
In some context, yeah. In some context, it can be totally interchangeably with LGBTQ plus community. And in some other ways, it can be used as more of an adjective.
Okay, cool.
Olivia?
Thank you.
Olivia, do you have a question or comment?
No, I think I don't know how to lower my hand.
I think you press the raise hand. Oh, you just got it. Michaela?
Oh, okay.
So yeah, Jada, I sort of wanted to speak to your question because at least the GSA at my high school, I only went to one meeting. I finally was brave enough to show up, and then the next week school was canceled indefinitely. But the one meeting that I went to, and I talked to my friend who goes more regularly, and she said that it's pretty consistent this way, is one of the leaders of the club will give a presentation. The week I went it was right before the presidential primaries, going through all the different candidates' policies on the LGBTQ community. And that was the first half. And then the second half was just sort of hanging out and talking about our weeks and what we had been up to. So I really liked it as a community. I hope to be able to go back whenever we are able to go back.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Michaela.
Anastasia?
I'm back with another question. So as someone who's part of the LGBTQ plus community, I don't even know how to phrase this question, but what exactly would you wish for straight people to do or to like help you out with, or like, I don't know how I don't even know how to phrase this question, but like, what difference would you make between do you kind of know what I'm saying? I don't even know what I exactly I want to say, but I'm guessing like, how do, for example, as a straight person, how, like, the way that I act, is there an, oh my God, I honestly don't know.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying.
Okay,
Correct me
yeah.
if I'm wrong. So
Yeah.
is your question about like, where do straight people or cisgender people start on their journey to supporting this community?
I think my question is more of like, as someone who's part of that community, what do you wish straight people like knew or understood or acted like when communicating with someone who is part of your community? Like, is there some kind of like level of ignorance you wish we didn't have? Probably. But like, what can I do to be more, I guess, yeah, what can I do to be more supportive and like when communicating with someone part of that community, like, yeah.
Awesome.
Sorry,
I think that's a perfect question. No, that's a totally perfect question. I really appreciate how you took the time to really formulate it and present it. And it actually goes in perfectly to the next part of the presentation. So I'm going to talk more about the answer to your question in the next slide. So this next slide is talking about the campaign goals. So just like you're saying, Anastasia, what is something that I as a member would want, or maybe other people in the community would want, and how does it intersect with this presentation? So I think the first answer is kind of, people don't know what they don't know. And so the first step to changing behavior or learning about this community is raising awareness. And so this presentation's raising awareness. Each of you will go off from this presentation with the ability to raise more awareness and engage in the different parts of this campaign. And then the next part of it is recognizing the impact that queer people have had in the world and recognizing their innate humanity, what they bring to the table, and also how they fought for the respect that they deserve. And I also like your question, Anastasia, because it points to, in this part of modern humanity, queer people are facing similar but different issues than people in the past have, fought for and like lobbied for. And so people kind of are all at different points. And what straight people can do is help queer people advocate for more inclusive policies and also to ban more harmful ones. And one organization that has a ton of awesome resources is the Trevor Project. And we'll get into that a little bit later. And the next part is the individual actions. And so I've created a bunch of different awareness and spotlight posts that talk about each different part of the queer community, and then also people who have fought and made a huge impact in those specific communities. So all down the acronym, each part of the acronym has 2 different posts. And coming back to what I would want from my experience, I think something that's really meaningful is for people who are allies to challenge queerphobia when they see it or when they hear it. Sometimes it can be really subtle, like somebody kind of saying like, oh, that's, like discrimination's not even an issue anymore. Or another example could be somebody misgendering a trans person. Or it could be saying like, they're gonna beat up somebody because like that gay person like looked at another person. And so challenging it, I think, is something that could be really, really impactful across the board, because it really takes a community to fight queerphobia. It doesn't just take one person, but each person can do their part. And some other individual actions that I think would really help normalize, how the trans community has found their place and become more like recognizable is for cisgender people and trans people to add their bios, to add their pronouns to their bios or their email signatures, or kind of just asking somebody when you meet them, hey, what are your pronouns? Or correcting somebody when you feel comfortable, hey, those aren't my pronouns, here's what they are. So I think that's one way that really speaks to my community. And also another part is the Allies Educate. So if you find yourself, you're a straight cisgender person and you want to support the community, Allies Educate is an awesome hashtag from the Trevor Project that gives out resources, it gives out like community building ideas, and I would definitely recommend that each of you check out that hashtag. Do you feel like that answered your question, Anastasia?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Cool, awesome.
Before you go on, I'm just curious because I don't know, like, what does cisgender mean?
Sure, yeah, great question. So cisgender is just the opposite of transgender. So when you're born and the doctor says, oh, it's a girl, it's a boy, based on like their first visual impression of you, and you grow up and throughout your life, you're like, yeah, I am a girl, or yeah, I am a boy. That just means that you're cisgender, that your gender identity isn't something that you want to change or experiment with, and you are comfortable with how your assigned gender and assigned sex match up. And transgender is just the opposite. So anybody who, deviates from their assigned gender, they're trans.
Wait, what is it called again?
It's cisgender, so CIS,
Oh, okay.
gender. All right, thanks for that question. So the next slide is explaining a little bit about an activity that I helped create that is on the OMM website. And it's really targeted towards creating a discussion space to talk about what your gender means to you, or what your pronouns mean to you, or what are some blind spots in your school or your community that make it more difficult for trans or non-binary people to just use the bathroom, or to just be in class and the teacher doesn't know their pronouns and they misgender them. And what I like about the gender euphoria activity is that you can make it as personal or non-personal as you want, and it's really customizable and up to you. And so definitely going to invite everybody in this Zoom meeting to check that out on the website and see if they can incorporate it into their OMM club, or maybe just looking at the questions and seeing, oh, hey, I know somebody who's exploring their gender. Maybe I could ask them what the significance of their pronouns or their new name means to them.
Ira, did you have a question? I saw your hand raised for a second.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, so going off of what Jada was saying, so would cisgender be the same thing as being straight?
Cisgender and straight are typically used together because they make up the majority of the US population, but they're not the same thing. So if you can all think back to the genderbread person, we have gender identity and we have sexual attraction. Cisgender is the gender identity, and the being straight or being heterosexual is your sexual attraction. And so if you are a man who is, categorized as a male at birth, and you look at a woman and you're sexually attracted to them, that means that you're most likely heterosexual. So they are used mostly together, but they are different. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a ton of good questions today. All right, so I'm gonna go on to the other part of this presentation that I was bringing up before, is the awareness part. So like I said before, the LGBTQ+ acronym has 8 different communities, and I've created 8 different awareness posts and 8 different spotlight posts that I'll be sending out throughout the month of the end of May all the way past, a little bit past of June, just to make the full round. And so you can see the awareness post on the left, that's the cover page, and on the right is some statistics. And this gives a sense of, what the LGBT or the lesbian community is and some of the struggles that they face. It's a little bit difficult to find out exactly what percentage of the populations are lesbians, but one survey found that 2% are of respondents. Another statistic are that throughout the kind of journey of realizing your lesbian sexuality, it typically you have markers at age 13, 18, and 21. And the last statistic is talking about some of the difficulties that the lesbian community faces. So that's a kind of a three-pronged statistic that you can use to garner some information about, okay, so this is the lesbian community. This is why it's so important for me to educate myself and educate other people and support this community. The next slide goes into, okay, so I know what the lesbian community is, but how do I treat them with respect and understand where they've come from? So I've included some terms to use, some basic terms, some terms that talk about the journey of coming out with your sexuality, or how to encourage somebody to live their truth but not to out them, like not to tell other people their sexuality before they're ready. And I've also included terms to avoid. So like the queer word that was a slur and people are reclaiming it, there's also slurs that were mostly used just for lesbian people, and I've listed them here. And the general rule of thumb is that it's up to the lesbian person what they want to use to describe themselves, but if it's a slur, you as a non-lesbian person shouldn't use that to describe somebody. And I've also included the F word. Some people may be familiar with this or unfamiliar with this, but it is typically a slur that is used against all queer people. And it also has some roots back into the like the Salem witch trials and the medieval ages. It's been a slur for a really long time. And the third one is a little bit more nuanced. So you may have heard some people describing lesbianism or being gay as a lifestyle. And this has fallen out of choice because it insinuates that there's a level of choice that somebody has with being gay. And that's just not the case. There's been a lot of findings that, people's sexuality is innate and it doesn't, it's not able to be changed by conversion therapy or by societal pressure. And I see your hand, Anastasia.
So I had a question because I've been kind of confused about how say someone was born as a boy and then they transitioned into being a girl because they realized that they were transgender,
mm-hmm.
and they are attracted to, so now they're a girl and they're attracted to boys.
Mm-hmm.
Are they gay or straight, or how, like, what is that called?
Yeah, that's a super good question. So typically in the trans community, people are coming to understand that whatever somebody transitions to, that's more of what they were their whole life, but they either didn't have the words to describe it or other people didn't educate them on that. And so typically what we use to describe people who transition from male to female is that, like male to female or assigned male at birth. And so because that person has transitioned to a woman or a girl and they like guys, that would make them heterosexual or straight.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question.
I have one thing to add on to that. So, wait, let me think of how to phrase this. If you have like a guy, let's just say, and he wants to be a woman, but he like hasn't gotten, he identifies as a woman, but hasn't actually transitioned yet. Is there a difference, or do you just classify it like if someone identifies as something, it doesn't matter and they're automatically already using those other pronouns?
Good question. Yeah, so there's a couple of different stages of transition, and sometimes people, start off with changing their name or their pronouns, and they may still be figuring out their gender identity. So typically, if somebody is saying like they're identifying as a girl or they're identifying as a boy, they're probably more comfortable with being called like a trans girl or a trans guy than just, a guy if they're assigned male at birth. So another way that I can explain that is however somebody's identifying, that's typically how they want to be referred to or categorized. And so one way that allies can really support somebody in their journey to transitioning to whatever they want to transition to is to ask them, hey, what pronouns do you want me to use for you? Or, you know, how do you want me to call you? Do you want me to call you a guy, or do you want me to call you a girl? And I think both of your questions, Jaden and Anastasia, are talking about, okay, so somebody's transitioning, but how do I refer to them? And that's going to be individualized to that person. So I definitely recommend asking that person in, you know, a private or confidential way, hey, I want to support you. How do you want me to call you? Because it can be confusing. But I think an open dialogue is the best bet. Awesome. Do we have any other questions? All right. So we talked about terms to use, terms to avoid. There's a more extensive list, but I think that is a pretty basic one that hits a lot of good points. And the next page is some different ways that people can learn and engage with this community. So if you like videos and you like to, you know, hear somebody explain what it's like for them, these are two great resources. So on the YouTube page, there's a section of videos called Inquiry, and there's so many good ones. These are just two that scrape the top of the iceberg, and they talk about two different types of lesbians, typically called femmes and typically called butches. They just represent people who, you know, present different ways. And on the right side, we have some resources. So we have 3 different websites that are lesbian friendly, and then we have Our Minds Matter that you can find other resources for this community. Cool, so that's the awareness post. The next one that will be, Hyra, I think your hand went up. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So I was thinking about, let's say you're like in a, I guess you're giving your presentation, or, you know, you're with a group of people. What's the best way, or what is the best way to ask for pronouns so that, you know, you don't make it awkward? Or
That's an awesome question. So I think there are a couple different ways that you could take that. So one way that I really like to do it is to invite everybody who feels comfortable to share their pronouns to do so when they share their name. And then another way is to kind of give them like a name tag where they can write their pronouns. And the reason why I like to invite people to share their pronouns is there may be some trans people or questioning people who are trying out some new pronouns, but they don't want everybody in that room to know. And so they may not disclose their pronouns that they really wanted you to use, but that's just because of the situation they're in. And then another part of the reason for inviting somebody is there may be some people who don't understand what pronouns are when you say them. We all use pronouns, we use he, she, they, but some people who may be unfamiliar with that term are kind of just like, well, I don't even know what a pronoun is. So like, what is this activity? So I think that's my best advice, is to describe a little bit about, hey, what's a pronoun? And also, here's why I'm inviting you to share it if you feel comfortable. That's a great question.
thank you.
All right, cool. So the next portion is the spotlight. So spotlights are a way that I'm referring to people who were really instrumental in the progression of their community's rights or their awareness. And I picked 2 people who are really awesome, Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon, and they are super cool because they started a club called Daughters of Bilitis. That was the first lesbian organization. They, you know, they were part of protests, they were part of community building exercises, and they actually were the first lesbian couple to get married several times. There were some, you know, states that legalized gay marriage, and then they, you know, made it illegal again. And so they were married actually several times, which I think is really cool. On the next, it goes into a little bit, what is this club? Why is it so important? And it talks a little bit about okay, so that was important, and it was so revolutionary because in the climate of 1955, people were not even, allowed to be out without major repercussions. They could be fired from their job, they could be put in jail, they could have their careers totally ruined. And if you were found out to be gay or engaging in homosexual relations, your name could even be put in a newspaper so that people in your community would know and that they could avoid you and avoid your business. So, the community has come so far in visibility and equal rights, and these two people were super instrumental in that. And the last slide is giving you a snapshot of some of their major advocacy efforts that you can look up and you can research. Side is their documentary, which gives you a chronicle of their political lives, but also their romantic lives. And the reason why I've created the spotlights is on the next slide, kind of merging the two worlds of awareness and of advocacy. So on the slide after this, it talks about, what is advocacy? Advocacy is basically supporting a community on their behalf by either engaging in their organization or doing things on your own. And some of the things that everyone in this Zoom call can do is to look up petitions that support equal rights or, new bills or new legislature, either to say, hey, this is exclusive, let's not pass this, or hey, this is inclusive, let's pass this. Another way is to share hotline resources like from the Trevor Project or other ones in your social media or just to somebody who's struggling. And some other ones, a little bit with the gender euphoria activity, is working from within your OMM club and in your school to make your school more inclusive to this community. I gave some examples about the transgender community, but there's other ones that you could do to tailor it to other blind spots that your school may have. And lastly, I included a portion of sharing the hashtag #AlliesEducate, because that's an awesome entry point for allies and people in the community alike. All right, so the next one are 4 movies that if you're chilling out in this quarantine, you want to watch a movie, you can check these out. So the Outlist is a documentary of people in the community in modern society, and it's interview based. So you really get to know who these people are and what they think, and you might recognize them like Ellen DeGeneres, Neil Patrick Harris, Wanda Sykes, really cool. We also have Jazz. I Am Jazz is, from what I understand, a docu-series. So, and Jazz, I think she transitioned at the age of 3, not medically, of course, just socially within her family. And her family was a pioneer in her community. They, fought for the right for her to play on the girls' soccer league, for her to use the women's bathroom in her school, and that is a really cool show. The next one is The Most Dangerous. So that is a documentary focusing on civil rights of trans kids. It's definitely like political heavy. It's definitely legislative heavy. And finally, Boy Erased. So this is a drama, and it focuses a lot on gay conversion therapy, which actually just became illegal in the state of Virginia very recently. I think it was last month, which is awesome. And so, yeah, definitely encourage you to check out those 4 media outlets. And lastly, we have the Trevor Lifeline. So some of you may have been familiar with the Trevor Lifeline, Trevor Chat or Trevor Text. So that is my presentation. Really appreciate everybody that, gave their thoughts, gave in their questions. And we have a couple minutes left. I know Laura Beth has some announcements to make. And if anybody has any questions, I will be releasing the, each awareness and spotlight posts weekly. And so I'll be the one who's moderating the comments, who's going to be available for questions. And if any of you want to hit me up in the comments, ask me a question. I'll definitely be able to respond.
Thank you so much, Emerson.
Thank you, everybody. It was great. Thanks for being here.
So if we can just go back to the last slide, and I just want to bring your attention to a couple of things. So Emerson's done such a lovely job to compile basically a whole social media toolkit for us to be able to use through the next several weeks. So what we'll do following this meeting is maybe later tonight or first thing tomorrow, we'll be sending out a link to these slides as we normally do, along with access to this Our Minds Matter Pride webpage. That's going to be the link, and we're going to be posting the virtual engagement guide that has some like ideas that you can do with your club, with your friends, with your family, along with a link to a shared drive folder so you could directly download some of the posts. So that will be available to you. And then something I would love to do if you're willing. So for the next minute, I'm going to play music and we're going to practice doing an individual action. So it's totally up to you, no pressure. But if you feel comfortable, let's listen to some music and then add our pronouns to our bio, and then we'll pick back up.
Met this girl down by the vine, had long tan legs and big brown eyes, seemed the type I would.
Wait, are we adding our pronouns on our Instagram bios?
Yes, our Instagram bios. Sorry, Anastasia, that wasn't.
No, it was pretty clear. I just wanted to double check.
Oh, I put my pronouns like under my name, like, for Zoom. That's what I thought you meant by bio.
See, exactly. It could be your Instagram bio, it could be Twitter, it could be your email. It doesn't have to be one of those things, but on some form of your communication, if you feel comfortable and ready to take an individual action to be an ally, then that will be our first step today. All right, guys. Here we go.
She said, boy, these are the terms to play. If you hit and run, there is no way we could ever be what you plan to be.
And just in case you missed it, Emerson, that was really great. Thank you so much, Emerson. Thank you. Your presentation was really great.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
And then while you guys are finishing that up, something we can do as a group action together is we could all change our logos on our social media pages to be the Our Minds Matter logo with the Pride colors. So we'll make sure you get that direct file so it has the highest resolution. So stay tuned for that if you want to take a group action together.
Is that for our personal account or for the club account?
For your club account, if you want to do it as your personal account, I think that would be great. But to think about it as a group and as a club, consult with your other club leaders and members. So you guys, you're a shared leadership team and take that action together.
Yeah. And another thing too, if you want to check out the Our Minds Matter Instagram, we have put kind of the Trevor Project resources. So like Tech Start to 678, and then the Trevor Project number in kind of the bio for this month. So that's something you could model, or your club could model as well if you wanted to, as a group action during this month.
Yeah.
And we'll be sharing a lot of other events that we hope to hold, like a viewing of a movie potentially. So stay tuned and be sure to follow different initiatives that we're running through this entire about 6 weeks.
Yeah. And one thing I want to, being here in this Zoom call is already a huge step for bringing awareness. And each little step that you make, like adding your pronouns in your Zoom bio, your email signatures, just asking somebody, you know, like, hey, how's your partner doing, instead of, you know, like immediately assuming that they have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or, you know, making your OMM club like visibly and actionably inclusive to the queer community. All of those have ripple effects. You may do one of those things, and somebody who isn't educated or isn't inclusive to the queer community, they may notice, okay, well, maybe I'll look into this, or maybe, you know, their mindset will change a little bit. And that's a major step, even though it seems really small. So thanks everybody for coming in, asking all of these awesome questions. Look forward to any engagement on the posts. And yes, definitely remember to sign in before you close if you haven't done that already.
Thank you, Emerson.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Emerson.
Bye, everyone. Have a good rest of
Thank
your
you.
day.
You did a great
Thanks,
job,
everyone,
Emerson.
for being here.
Thanks, Jada.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emerson.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, Michaela. Well, alrighty. It's just us, I think. Oh,
2 more people left.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just us now. Awesome.
How did that feel?
Wait, I think we still have Olivia.